Hi there. In this lecture we see an absolutely amazing game, Nezhmetdinov against Kotkov in 1957, 17th RSFSR Championship. So it starts off with black trying to play a very solid opening. We have a royal pairs, the Berlin defense, which is all the rage nowadays. White castles, knight takes e4. We see now the rook e1 variation. So a popular variation nowadays is also d4. So after knight c6, bishop takes c6, d takes e5, knight f5. This position has been quite topical due to Vladimir Kramnik popularizing it when he used it to neutralize Garry Kasparov. But in this game, actually, we get a different variation. Instead of d4, we get rook e1. So we have knight d6, knight takes e5. So black has to be careful. Bishop e7 is a careful move. If knight takes b5, yeah, 5 points. We just take on c6 and we're hitting the queen. We're going to win the queen. If knight takes e5 here, that's just an even position. That is plausible. We've got to move our bishop. Well, we should move our bishop perhaps back. Even position. So, okay, bishop e7. We have now bishop d3. Yeah, our knight is now hanging. Sorry, the knight is attacking the bishop. Our bishop is now hanging. So bishop d3. Yeah, we don't want to play d4 here because of knight takes b5. And there's no penalty. So bishop d3. But it's also, okay, it's blocking the pawn. And what about this bishop? Well, this bishop might be going onto this diagonal later. The bishop is actually eyeing h7. There's no defender of h7. We see black castling knight c3. Now we have knight takes e5, rook takes e5, bishop f6, and now rook e3. This is not without venom, this move rook e3. We have g6, precautionary. If b6, what would you play for 10 points? Make it 100 points. What would you play here? Yeah, we'd play bishop takes h7 check, queen h5 check, rook h3. And it's kind of game over. So bishop h4, we've got a really crushing attack here. And for example, just to take it a bit further, rook h6 now is emphasizing white's domination of the position, and black would have to give up the queen. It's horrible stuff. Okay. So good safety point, g6, to avoid bishop takes h7 check. Queen f3, the bishop's attacked. Well, kind of under pressure, it's moved back. Which is actually an inaccuracy. It seems rook e8 might be more accurate. So say b3. And the rooks come off. You can see that white hasn't got this enormous e-file pressure, which is significant during the game. So this position, and black's getting ready for d5. This should end up in limiting white's advantage, just having a bishop pair, but nothing major going on in the middle game for checkmating the king. The queens are off. So rook e8 does seem like one way. Knight e8 is another, where actually, you know, here black can set up a position like this, but you can see that white does have file domination to some extent. So rook e8 does seem, from a human point of view, the way to go. It's based on this knight being on d6, so that if we took, they're not going to drop their bishop. They can play knight takes. And yeah, otherwise, yeah, this is going to be okay for black. Yeah, that's a way of equalizing, nearly equalizing. But bishop g7, we have b3. So this bishop was the downside of the bishop being on d3, blocking the pawn, which blocks in the bishop. Knight e8. Yeah, if black plays bishop takes c3 to double the pawns, this isn't so clever. We can play f takes here for dynamic play on the f file. And this position is going to look terrible for black. We've got a strong light square pressure here. And taking this a bit further, we've got definite pressure and prospects. So knight e8 is played. Bishop a3, d6, and now this kind of domination of the e file positioning, it looks very nice, knight f6. If c6, this is plausible actually. So say queen g3, bishop e6, blunting the rooks on the e file. Now we could try h4 here and h5. Let's say queen a5. So hitting our bishop, offering d6. This would simplify a bit and even position. Not queen f6 though, because then we're just taking on e8. Thanks very much. Okay. So yeah, c6 is a plausible move here. Even if d6 is more fragile to queen g3, that's fine. Bishop e6, yeah, we see that. It's plausible. But knight f6 was played. h3. If h4 is played, we're weakening g4, and let's say knight g4, you know, this is not very sound for us to do this. Black's going to be okay with advantage, so let's not go crazy. And if we move back, then we just drop h4. So it's not, we can't go crazy with h4. So h3, that tempo gaining rook, you know, on e3 potentially. So extinguishing knight g4 ideas. Knight d7. Now here knight d5. Black makes the position much worse with this next move. Now you could say, well, this is a diagonal of death kind of related mistake. I mean, yeah, pawns don't go backwards type of mistake. And you know, I've analysed this game on a few occasions, and as part of that analysis, I showed various ways for black to go incredibly wrong. Let's just review those at this move 16 junction point. If c6, knight e7 check, and we just take out d6, thanks very much. It looks like bad news, and it is. Knight takes c8, protects the bishop and hits the rook. So that's completely out of the question, c6. Completely. b6 is completely out of the question. Knight e7 check and then take the rook, thanks very much. Knight e5 is also out of the question because a rook takes e5. That bishop's quite good on a3. After here, what would you play? Yeah, rook takes e5. D takes in here. What would be the key point? For 100 points, what would be the key point? We've got bigger fish to fry than taking the rook here. We play bishop e7. Where does the queen go? d7 or e8. We end up playing knight f6 check. Doesn't matter if the queen was on e8. Thanks very much. So that's no good either. Knight e5. Yeah. So if d takes here, bishop e7. And this is also not particularly great. After knight f6 check, queen takes, and this situation. Okay, we are solid pawn up here, and if rook e8 there, rook takes e5. This situation, queen f4. This is also a very dangerous position for black. With the dark squares compromised, it's very dangerous. So anyway, so knight e5 can be ruled out. King h8 is actually one of the better moves. And let's say c4, knight b6. This situation, knight takes, queen takes. White has an edge, but it's not completely crushing just yet. c5 is one of the better moves as well, funny enough. At least it blunts the bishop. So knight e7 check, knight takes, queen d5, queen c6, offer double pawns. And white does have an advantage, but it's not absolutely gigantic. Bishop c8, some tricky moves needed to put pressure on the black position. But let's say we get this position, rook e2. Is a good move here. And let's say knight f3 check, king f1. And we get an advantageous endgame. Let's say rook b8, bishop a6. And we have the advantage in the endgame here. A small edge. So yeah, there's king h8 basically and c5. These are two moves which seem better than others. But f5 certainly is a bad idea. Now, why is it a bad idea? And this is where, one of the whole points of this course is, what's in it for us is a big question. It's all very well me entertaining you with brilliant games, but how will that help your chess game to game that you want to play and win? We can look at some interesting elements of brilliant combinations and try and diagnose the errors as we have been doing. And some of those errors fall into a class of underestimation. A big class, I would say, of underestimation. So when playing against fierce, dangerous, dynamic, attacking players, it's very easy to underestimate dynamic factors. There's a particular dynamic factor here which, even on reviewing this game before, a few times before and doing analysis before, it still compels me to see just how powerful there's a particular aspect of the combination we see, the absolute pin aspect. Now, an absolute pin is when a pin's piece is to the king, and that means they're not actually covering certain squares. Now, what does that mean? It means that maybe if you get into those squares, then you can get other team members of your pieces to probe even more squares. The implications are vast of an absolute pin, and we see a remarkable one emerging from this position, which is created by a weakness of the last move. In theory, we could absolutely pin the rook. Let me just point this out here. In theory, we could absolutely pin the rook. If we're absolutely pinning the rook wouldn't be defending f7. If we had a queen on f7, then all of a sudden we have killer common squares like g7. If we could put more pressure on g7. Just bear in mind with this. Say we have a queen on f7. Also, we could have rook e7 to put pressure on g7. So rook e8 as an absolute pin is something which maybe wouldn't be on most players' radar. It's when we examine extremely brilliant combinations, try and dissect them, then we can maybe answer the question, what's in it for us? So yes, this is like one of the first times I've actually realized the strength at the heart of this game is creating a weakness of the last move to get an absolute pin. So I've given you a clue. How would you create a weakness of the last move of the opponent, force a weakness to create an absolute pin? So the absolute pin creates a kind of cascading effect that we get access to one key square, which then helps us gang up on other key squares. It's amazing leverage, basically. Amazing leverage, the absolute pin. There's two strong moves at least here. Now, the remarkable one played by Nezhmetdinov is knight takes c7, which does actually create this idea of the absolute pin. Bishop c4 is also strong. Let's look at bishop c4 for the record for a moment. So rook e7 here. And it is a dominating position if knight e5, queen f4. And let's say rook e8, we can take, and knight takes c7, black's crumbling. That is a really annoying position. Let's say black plays a6, queen f4, b5. There is actually are kind of, that pressure on h7 is a virtual kind of pin here. We can play bishop b2. And if bishop takes queen h6, you can see that. Look at the pressure on h7 here. That's also pretty powerful stuff. This is absolutely winning as well. So bishop c4 does have a lot of power to it, actually. So just to recap here, if the rook's on e7, we've got this kind of virtual pin to h7, which means, if the bishop's lured away, we get prepared for things. It is a dangerous position here, and we've got knight takes c7 on, or rook takes c7 on the cards. Rather, rook takes c7 here. Sometimes, if rook e8, then we'd have knight takes c7. But anyway, so it is dangerous, bishop c4, but this is remarkable, I would say, for demonstrating the absolute pin. In fact, if there's nothing else you ever remember from this course, remember about absolute pins, because this is a whole knight sack to get an absolute pin on a rook. It's not about weakening d6. Don't be confused. It's not about weakening d6. It first starts with queen d5 check, which gives the impression, is it about d6? No, it's not about d6. We've invested a knight. So the idea is rook e8. If we played bishop takes d6, it's not about winning material like this. Knight f6 is a resource. And actually, with knight f6, if queen e5, queen d8, it's an even position. If we played queen takes d6, this is more testing. And let's say knight f6, this situation, funny enough, rook e8 can lead to a small edge because of the relative pin. Okay, celebration of a relative pin with bishop d5, bishop e6. And then we do get a small edge in the endgame. That's not what Nezhmetdinov had in mind, though. If rook g8, bishop c4, big advantage for white. But anyway, that's not the point. Neither bishop takes or queen takes is the point. It's this absolute pin, which is the top move, which engines approve as well. It crumbles the black position because it unlocks the power of f7, which is a bridge, a supporting element for rook e7 and bishop b2. So the power of the pin piece is illusionary, is a famous expression. And we can kind of extend that idea, I would say, to say, and the square that's not covered can then be used for massive leverage to further our attack. Queen f7, if we get queen into f7, we're right near the opponent's king, and we have leverage with rook e7 and bishop b2 coming up. This is remarkably powerful, this absolute pin. We have knight f6 being played. Let's look at the alternatives here. If knight b6, then what we can do here is rook takes f8 check, bishop takes, bishop b2 check, and there's another absolute pin, and the back row is fatally weak. Rook e8 is checkmate. And if queen g7, that looks desperate. We can either take the queen with check, or actually we can celebrate the absolute pin here with queen f7, giving us access to queen takes f8, checkmate. So this position is just absolutely, black's getting crushed. So basically knight b6 is out of the question. Knight e5, we can play here. What would you play here for 10 points? Yeah, there is actually a relative pin as well. We can use rook 1 takes e5, bishop takes f8. So here, in this position, queen g8 check, rook f7, and we're hitting the queen at h7, and h4 check, queen h6 check, queen g5 is checkmate. So that doesn't help. What about a6 here? Queen f7, we get access to queen f7, which means we're now threatening things like rook 1 to e7. Yeah, that absolute pin's delightful. And we've got a relative pin. So b5, rook 1 to e7, threatening queen takes g7 checkmate. So b4, queen takes g7 checkmate. So a6 is no good. Queen c6, queen f7. Again with the threat of rook 1 to e7. So a6, rook 1 to e7. And let's say rook g8. Rook takes g8 is checkmate. What else is black doing here? Moving the bishop. We take on h7, mate. So it's wonderful stuff. So black tried knight f6. We have now rook takes f8 check. Bishop takes f8. And now another absolute pin, bishop b2. Unpinning. But there's an absolute pin basis here, which is a fantastic move. I had described it as a brilliant, fantastic move, a move of genius years back. So I'll at least give you 500 points for this next move. What would you play here? Okay, the move is bishop c4. Now, if knight takes d5, that is an absolute pin. So it's a weak back row. This is checkmate. If b5, rook e8 check. So if knight takes, we've got this battery as well. That's a common square. Batteries imply common squares. Queen g8 checkmate. If bishop f8, queen. What can you see? Can you see a good move here? Absolute pin on the knight. It's not really covering g8. Queen g8 is checkmate. What about queen d8? Here, queen f7 is crushing. So we've got a big threat of rook e7, among other things. Let's say queen d7. What would you play here, which is crushing? 10 points. Yeah, queen takes f6. We get this absolute pin here. The back row's too weak. Checkmate. So quite amazing stuff. So after bishop c4, we have the move bishop d7 being played. And here bishop takes f6 is played. Now this may be a slight slip up actually. Nezhmetdinov is human after all. Queen f7 is technically stronger. Going into that square does support rook e7 as well as the immediate bishop takes f6. If the queen had gone into f7, let's say knight h5. Bishop takes g7, check. Knight takes, this rook e7 is vicious. h6, queen takes g7, checkmate. But what else? You know, rook g8, we're just going to take that rook. Let's look at this again. And let's say rook f8. What would you play here for 100 points? Actually, we're kind of leveraging a relative pin as well, rook e8, because that pin against the queen is useful. So on bishop takes, yeah, we could just take the queen. On knight takes, there's an absolute pin revealed. The bishop's not covering f8. We can play queen takes f8, checkmate. On rook takes, bishop takes f6, threatening queen takes, or bishop takes g7, mate. If rook g8 here, queen takes g8 is checkmate. But what does black do here after bishop takes f6? So bishop takes, queen takes f6 is checkmate. The bishop covers escape squares. Rook e7, bishop takes g7 is checkmate. Yeah, the queen doesn't have to take part there because the rook's holding, but bishop takes is checkmate. Yeah, queen f7 is absolutely crushing. Nezhmetdinov's slight inaccuracy of the game, bishop takes f6 is played. though, and queen f7 now. Queen d8 walks into a mate in 2. Resistance could have been had with bishop g5. Nezhmetdinov is just human. And in this position, let's say one of the strongest moves is g3. It seems. Because we want to try and nudge the bishop with h4 away from e7 to get our rook e7 in. So let's say f4, h4. Now if bishop h6, we get our rook e7 in, and it's crushing. So let's say f takes, though. Black gives up a piece to get this position, and this check, and can drive it to an endgame, which is not ideal. And the endgame happens to be better for white. White does have a clear advantage in this endgame, but it's not really what we were dreaming about. So yes, bishop g5 does offer resistance. So g3, if b5 instead of f4, h4, and this position, we've now got this big rook e7 coming. So queen e8, rook e7. And it's pretty hopeless here because we're threatening queen takes h7. And if queen g8, we've got queen f6. Let me just reiterate, even if you forget a lot of other things in this course, we're saying an absolute pin gives access sometimes to key squares, and those key squares can themselves be leverage for getting more pressure on other key squares around the opponent's king. So it's really driving our attacks forward, like very few other tactical elements. Absolute pins are absolutely amazing. But anyway, in the game, queen d8 didn't help black at all, walking into a forced mate here. So can you see the forced mate in 2? And I do have a course just on checkmates if you're more interested in the final checkmates. But here, yeah, there's a forced mate in 2. You might want to try and visualize this. For 100 points, what would you play? Yeah, rook e8 check. Game ends, because if bishop takes, that's interrupting the queen's protection of f8. It's disconnecting the queen from f8. Queen f8 is checkmate. If queen takes e8, there's a weakness of the last move. It's just weakened f6. So queen takes f6 is checkmate. So yes, brilliant game. Not so brilliant that there isn't something that we can say, what's in it for us looking at these brilliant games? Okay, they're entertaining, but can we use any of this stuff in our own games? I would say, just to recap, absolute pin. The knight sack actually created a weakness of the last move, which created an absolute pin, and that does answer the question, in a way, what's in it for us? Inspecting these brilliant games, there's something about this remarkable rook e8, not being tempted with the d6 pawn, but favouring an absolute pin for the absolute leverage, fantastic leverage of queen f7, which would give leverage in turn for a rook e7 and bishop b2. Once we're around that king, you know, we've got pressure all around the place. Once we've got a queen on f7, as well as, okay, relative pin as well on d7 helps, of course. Amazing stuff, and should certainly spice up some of our games in the future. This revision of the power of the absolute pin, how easy it is for defenders against great attacking players like Alekhine, Tal, Nezhmetdinov, how easy it is for them to underestimate the raw power of absolute pins. Okay, thanks so much. All comments, questions, likes and subscribes, really appreciated. Thanks so much.